Well, thanks a lot, Tavi, for the invitation to give this seminar, and welcome everyone from all over the world that is interested in Chile and in Chilean glaciers. I'm very happy to talk to you about the recent research that has been done in Chile, and also about some news regarding the new glacier law that is, I presume, very interesting for all of you. This talk is not about my data or my research or new data. It's mainly general or very general, and then I will present some of the indications of this new law that has been discussing for many years now. So we can open a discussion about this, and hopefully we can exchange ideas and comments regarding this very important issue for us. First of all, as I say, thanks for the invitation, and also to IGS, our society, because well, I'm the Chilean representative or correspondent of the IGS in Chile, and I hope more people from my country can join the society that is the oldest and the most important in terms of the glaciological research. I'm a full professor at the University of Chile, the Department of Geography, and also now we are working as a private consultant in this company. All the information that I'm going to give, or more information about Chile and glaciers, is available in this webpage that is one of the oldest in terms of glaciological research, at least in Spanish. I think it's the first one, or one of the first. I began with this webpage in 1997, so it's like archaeology, but I think we have improved the webpage. So hopefully anybody in the Spanish world interested on glaciers can visit the webpage. Anyway, so we are going to talk about Chilean glaciers and the glacier law. But let's go first to some of the challenges we are experiencing now in our country. We're living at quite, interesting times, because we're living several problems at the same time. We suffer social unrest with many riots and demonstrations and violence a couple of years ago due to inequalities and economical crisis in the country. That was a couple of years ago. And then the pandemic. And on top of that, climate change, water scarcity, and the need for a new political system in our country. So we are living times of crisis. And I'm quoting here Charles Warren, my good friend from Scotland, well, from the UK, who I met when he was doing his PhD in Chile in 1992. And we went together with the rally operation to the southern Patagonian icefield, and also to the northern Patagonian icefield, also together with Neil Glacier and other students of David Sagden that were interested in Chile. And he just published this paper where he's talking about the crisis. That is a Greek term that is meaning, I mean, the meaning of the word is decision, and I think we are in times of making decisions, and good decisions for our societies. And this involves also the scientific community like us dealing with glaciers. When I began my career, I wanted to go far away from the social problems that we were living during the dictatorship. I'm talking about the 80s. So I decided to study glaciers. That is the most far away issue in terms of political problems. But now, after almost 40 years, 30-something years, the glaciers are in the center of the political discussion. So I'm going back to the old times. But I think it's important for us to address these issues, this problem, this crisis, and providing our best support to a better decision-making process. So the problem is that the overlapping problems that or crises that we are living in now, and there are bad aspects or corners of these problems. For example, well, the thousands of people that were killed by the COVID virus, but also there are good things like the government taking into account the scientific community for confronting the COVID, the pandemic. And this is not only about the health system and what to do, vaccination, etc., but also in other issues like climate change. I think the political community, let's say the government, is getting aware that scientists can collaborate, can contribute in a much better way than other people to resolve the problems, to have a good decision-making process. So after these 2 years of pandemic, when everybody was concerned about the virus, now we hope climate change and the consequences of climate change are coming back as one of the most critical issues that we are living in at present. Chile is one of the countries more affected by climate change in several senses, and I hope after the most dramatic part of the COVID, the pandemic, is gone, we can go back to the climate change problem, addressing the main consequences of this, you know, and you know, making decisions about adaptation, mitigation, and other critical aspects that we need to confront at the moment. So let's go first to the expression how this climate change crisis is affecting the country. I'm not going to talk about the social unrest and all these problems that are quite critical, of course, but I want to show some of the characteristics of the climate change crisis that we are living. You know, in the last almost 13 years, we are living under what is called the mega drought. Yeah, mega drought period. It's 13 years of very low precipitation in central southern Chile, with absolute minimums in precipitation that have no parallel in the last 1,000 years, as a continuous period of very low precipitation in central Chile. This mega drought, as was called by climatologists, is extending, I mean, it's affecting the most populated area of the country, nearby Santiago, but also a bit further north and even northern Patagonia. This mega drought is having, as you can expect, many consequences in terms of runoff, in terms of the volume that is stored in dams all around this central region. The snow line also is above all the mountain ranges, and most of the glaciers at the end of the summer have no snow at all. If you see photograph of March, I mean, a couple of weeks ago, that were taken from glaciers in the high Andes of Santiago, it's amazing. I mean, the glaciers are full of penitentes, even at very high altitude, more than 5,000 meters, no snow at all, and a huge amount of water. So this mega drought is having an effect in terms of the snow line here, for example, in terms of the volumes in the water reservoir, in terms of the snow line, in terms of the runoff. But this is not only in terms of, it's not only affecting the country in terms of precipitation, and not only in the last 13 years. Because if you go back in time, if you see the temperature changes from the beginning of the last century, it's clear that Santiago is experiencing a quite a strong increase in temperature. So it's the combination of the temperature increases and the reduction of precipitation in the central part of the country that is expressing this crisis that we are living in terms of the climate changes affecting the country. In agreement with René Garreau, another climatologist, is getting clear that obviously not all the low precipitation that we are observing in recent years is due to climate change. They think that about 25% of the low precipitation, the mega draw, is due to anthropogenic factors, and the rest is obviously comprised by many factors, especially natural variability. But the anthropic factor is getting quite important. And what is interesting also is that during the mega draw, we saw originally that was due to the more frequent presence of La Niña events. You know, in central Chile, the ENSO events are well correlated to precipitation in the long term. You know, during El Nino, yeah, the precipitations are higher in central Chile, and during La Niña, the precipitation is lower. But during the mega draw, and what is observed here, this clear correlation is gone, and we have very low precipitation years, years with very low precipitation during La Niña, during neutral years, during El Nino. So this relationship between the climate system and El Nino is not as clear as it used to be. And this is a problem because obviously the forecast, the models for what is going on in the coming year, in the next years, is not totally clear. Maybe El Nino is important, but we don't, the forecast probability, I think, is having a lot of uncertainties. But anyway, this year, we are now going to do under the La Niña conditions. This is the blue line here, and the probability of having La Niña during the rest of the year is here in blue, is going down, but still during the winter, this winter, I mean 2022, is probably will be also La Niña, meaning that more likely will be low precipitation in central Chile. But as I say, there is not so clear relationship between El Nino and precipitations. One of the consequences of this mega draw and this low precipitation is this quite complicated table that I just downloaded yesterday, and it's a map that is produced by the Chilean government, the Public Works Ministry, and it's showing you all the communities or municipalities in the country that have a decree, a legal status of water scarcity. It's water scarcity decree. So they are now pointed as communities or municipalities where water is very low, water availability is very low, and then the government needs to invest and provide money, even restrict the use of water if necessary, and interfere with the water providers, like the big companies for drinking water, like Agua Andina and others, trying to keep the water flow in the minimum level to avoid a crisis for the population, giving priority to the human consumption of the water. So you can see here that almost 54% of the country now, of the municipalities of the country are under this scarcity decree. And also, if you see the area, is about 1/3 of the country is under this decree, meaning 8% of the total population of the country. This is amazing. I mean, and almost all central Chile here, all these numbers are the regions and the areas where these water scarcity decrees have been enforced. And you can see it's not only central Chile where the mega draw is more clear, but also here in Patagonia, Coyhaique. So this is the best expression of the problem that we are living. And how to, it's interesting also to see how this scarcity is not affecting everyone within these regions at the same level. This figure here is also very new, but it's showing you on the left side the overcrowding. I mean, how much people are living per area in Santiago. And the darkest colors are very high overcrowded. A lot of people living just per house, let's say. High density, population density. And here on the right, you have the water consumption. So in these colors, you can see the amount of the liters per habitant per day that is consumed in these communities, in these municipalities. You know, 500 liters per habitant, 500 liters per habitant per day in these municipalities. And if you compare both, you will see that they are very low density communities. So what is the problem? The problem is that here is living the rich people of the country. The richest people of the country, of Santiago, this is the capital of the country, is living up here, yeah, in the eastern side of the city. And they are having the maximum consumption of water. And the low income communities are having very low consumption of water. So the scarcity this is at the moment, I mean, so even with this water scarcity problem, the people is still overusing the water in these rich communities. And this is the problem, the inequalities that are connected to the economical inequalities here, and the lack of regulation. So now with this decrease and with the forecast of future problems, the government will need to reduce the consumption in these richest municipalities of the country. So this is another expression of the climatic crisis, and together with the economical crisis, because I mean, it's not only that the water is scarce, but it's also the poor people has no access to the same amount of water compared to the rich people. And now we will need to interfere with the market, because in Chile you can, well, it's in a special legal status of the water, but you can own some actions, especially if you are a farmer in the agriculture sector. So anyway, this is an expression of why we are having problems with the water, because it's overused in some areas, and obviously it's because the natural offer is quite low at the moment. So and what is going on in southern Chile? Well, in southern Chile we also are experiencing some reductions in precipitations. This is the area with mega draw, as I told you, but also in northern Patagonia here and in central Patagonia, we are observing some reductions in precipitation. Yeah, and these reductions are quite important, especially in the summer. Yeah? This is good in a sense, because I mean we are talking about glaciers, we are talking about accumulation. This is taking place mainly in the winters, and in the winters June, July, August, the changes are not so strong compared to the summer. But anyway, the reduction in precipitation is affecting central Chile and also the northern part of Patagonia. And here you can see the precipitation in Puerto Montt, that is just here in the northern part of Patagonia, where there is a clear reduction in precipitation in winter and in summer. What is interesting is that the further south in central Patagonia, where is the northern Patagonian icefield and the southern Patagonian icefield, at least in terms of the reanalysis data, the precipitation trend is reversed, and we're having a positive precipitation trend, especially in the icefield. So this is like the border, the transition area between a reduction of precipitation further north and increase of precipitation further south. We will see later on in this talk that even with this increase in precipitation in the ice fields, the glaciers are losing mass at very high rates anyway. And in terms of temperature, also the Patagonian region is showing a clear warming trend. I mean, there are some regions with very high rates of warming trend, like in Tierra del Fuegos. This is reanalysis data. But in Patagonia, where most of the glaciers are, there are some places where the warming is very clear, like, for example, here in Cochrane, where you can see the trends in Celsius degrees per decade. And there is a good correlation between the reanalysis data and some of the stations in the region. So southern Chile is also getting, in synthesis, southern Chile is having a reduction in precipitation and an increase in temperature, affecting obviously not only the population, but also the glaciers. So let's go to some glaciology, some very quickly. What probably you all know this, but Chile is the country with more glaciers in South America. In the inventory, the glacier inventory that was published a couple of years ago, they were identified about 24,000 glaciers with an area of 23,641 square kilometers of ice. Now the Water Ministry, the PGA, that is the main office in charge of the glaciers inventory of the country, is preparing a new version of this water cadastre, and that will be published probably in coming weeks. I was invited to review the new inventory with newer images, and I think it's showing some very good improvements compared to these numbers that are quite old. You know, the inventory that I'm showing here was done with satellite images from 15 years ago. So now we are preparing, I mean, DGA is preparing a new version of this inventory, and probably the number of glaciers will increase because fragmentation and inclusion of new glaciers, but the area will probably be reduced. And as you can imagine, southern Chile, where Patagonia is, where most of the glaciers and the area in all this in this part of the country, where 88% of the glaciers are located. Let's go very quickly to some of the recent papers and research, and this is central Chile, where there are near 1,000 square kilometers of ice in the most populated area of the country, and where glaciers are more important in terms of runoff, because they, you know, well, melting is taking place mainly in the summer, where most of the water is consumed, where consumption is very high. So the importance of glaciers in central Chile is very high, and these glaciers are retreating and receding very fast and thinning at very high rates. And here you have one of the basins close by Santiago in the high mountains with more glaciers, and this is an inventory that was done of this basin in 55 with more than 112 square kilometers, and now in 2018 they was reduced to 75 square kilometers of ice. So near 35 square kilometers of ice were lost in the last 70 years or 70 years approximately. And here, you know, you can see a map that I prepared in a project together with Mike Kaplan. So hi Mike, I know that you are around, and it's showing the little ice age maximum in this area with this color. There are two advances, but let's say that this is the last the LIA, the little ice age maximum that took place probably the middle of the 19th century, but we are working on this. And now compared to the present glaciation in the area, it's showing, you know, a clear trend that is near 50% of the glaciers remains in this area in the high mountains. It's amazing because the first explorers that went up to the central Andes in this region here saw like an ice field, a huge ice field, and these glaciers were joining together at the beginning of the century, and was totally unexplored. I mean, the first map with more details were produced basically by Luis Libutri in the 40s and the 50s. So it's amazing because it's very close to Santiago and was totally, almost totally unknown until the 50s. And it's one of the biggest englaze areas in the country. And the biggest glacier here is Juncal Sur, where I have been working with colleagues. And it's amazing because this glacier suffered an advance in 1947 that was described by Libutri, reaching the bottom of Gran Salto del Olivares. That is an ice wall of about 800 meters. It's huge, it's amazing. And now the glacier is up here with a very long frontal retreat of several kilometers. And in total, this glacier lost about 22% of the area since 1955. So it's huge changes in this part of the country. If you see the longest mass balance series in Latin America that is produced, is measured at Glacier de Chaurren Norte, yeah, that is one of the most important glaciers, I think, for the World Glacier Monitoring Service, because it's the longest series of mass balance in the country, that began in 1975. Is showing that in the continuous survey of the glacier up to now, of the last year, lost about 29 meters of water equivalent as a total accumulated mass balance. This is impressive. I mean, and the glacier, I visited the glacier in 1989, wasn't a small glacier, you know, about 0.5 or something like this, square kilometers, half a square kilometer of ice, with penitentes and so on. And I was collaborating with DGA, that is the agency that is in charge of this, the mass balance survey. And then at the end of the 90s, it was covered by a lot of material they discovered. And now at present here, you know, you can see this is 2015 in a work done by David Farias. It's almost gone. It's almost gone. So I think we need to look for a new glacier for doing the mass balance in this region. I presume DGA now is thinking about this, because it's good to keep this glacier as much as possible. But at the moment, I think it's a discovered glacier at the end of the summer. In terms of runoff, the glaciers in this part of the country, in central Chile, are, as I told you, are quite important for the population, because they are contributing a huge percent of the summer runoff of the main rivers. Yeah, but this is changing, and we expect that this contribution will be reduced in the future. This is the paper by Ayala in the Chrysler in 2020, and the contribution by glaciers is probably going to be reduced. And we think that the water peak of in this region is already took place in the last decade. So for the future, we're probably going to observe a reduction on runoff in the area. We are also observing a change in terms of the stationality of the precipitation. That is moving from spring, when most of the snow was accumulated, to winter, and it's probably there is a shift between solid precipitation to liquid precipitation. Therefore, the runoff is getting more stochastic, with high variability, with less summer runoff coming from the glaciers, etc., with all the consequences of this in terms of the quality of the water, with higher turbidity, with hydrological or hydrometeorological risks, etc. And this is a photograph that I published in a book in honor of Louis Libutri, that was published a couple of years ago, where you can see the Glacier Juncal Sur, yeah, in 1950 and 2018. Yeah, this is a photograph by the German climbing club that was visiting the area for the first time in some cases in the 50s, and this looks like a Glacier Juncal Sur going down the Salto del Olivar here, and now is up to here, and that is almost gone. So it's a world that is gone. It's amazing in our lifetimes that, you know, it's a world that is disappearing. And it's amazing because look at this here, you know, in the 1950s, the glacier was covering most of this valley, and at the bottom of this mountain range was full of ice, and at the moment looks like this. So the deglaciation process is quite amazing in central Chile. Southern Patagonia is one of the regions in this paper by Ugonet that is having one of the highest contribution to sea level rise compared to other regions. So we know this, we don't need to go into more details. And this paper by Sayan is showing that this contribution is mainly coming from the ice fields in southern Patagonia. She was comparing SRTM with Aster DEMs from the 2018. And there's some variability, of course. Some areas are not losing mass at the same rates of others, but in general, the mass balance is quite negative in all the region. If you go to the southern ice field, there is the main English area of southern South America, or South America in total, you know, it's about 12,000 square kilometers of ice. It's an area that is having extremely heavy changes. I mean, in some cases, for example, Jorge Mon retreated more than 23 kilometers since the beginning of the 19th century. Viedma is also having a strong retreat and thinning in the Argentinian side. Uppsala also having a strong retreat. And then you have a very contrasting behavior of P11 here that is advancing, you know, advanced about 15 kilometers since 1945. So it's a very contrasting behavior, but in general, a very negative mass balance. And you can see here the area changes between my estimations in 1945 of about 13,800 meters, 13,883 square kilometers of ice, and now only 12,000, roughly speaking, with some big differences between the glaciers, but with some maximum retreats in O'Higgins, Jorge Montt, Uppsala, and some advances like in P11. But here you can see that the area change rates are increasing with the highest rate in the most recent data we have. So Patagonia is losing, the southern Patagonian ice field is losing about 33 square kilometers of ice per year. That's amazing. Anyway, but as I told you, this paper by Haber and Foresta are showing that not the whole ice field is acting or responding at the same rate. There's some positive areas with positive accumulation or mass balance like P11, and others with very negative mass balances like Uppsala, Jorge Montt, Viedma. And the explanation of these huge changes are the role, the importance of calving that is taking place almost all around this ice field, and also in most of the glaciers of the northern Patagonian ice field. Here you have the northern ice field, and here you have the southern ice field, and most of the glaciers in both of them are calving into fjords or lakes. And you know very well that in those cases, the glaciers are not only responding to climate change and increasing temperature, but also to the conditions of the glacier fronts, where bathymetry and the water depth is quite important for giving some stability or instability to the glaciers. And the dynamic component of all these glaciers is quite important. And this factor is explaining most of the mass balance changes. Because if you go to the surface mass balance, the ice field is, as I told you before, you know, is having in equilibrium or even a positive trend, the accumulation. the surface mass balance. But if you take into account the calving and the frontal ablation, the total balance is very negative. This is explaining the differences between different glaciers, you know, and this is why we have some very red dots here in some of the calving glaciers, especially on the eastern side, and only one exception, that is Pionce, that we have published a couple of papers trying to explain that, but it's, I mean, it's getting too long to give more details about this here. But as I told you, one of the most critical issues is this, the retreat of the glaciers into very deep fjords, like this in Vietnam. Is a work that we are doing together with our Argentinian colleagues, Luis Lenzano, Gabriela Lenzano from Yanigla. We hope to go back to the field after the pandemic for the first time in the last 2 years to do the survey to this area here, because it's gone. I mean, the first time I went together with them, the glacier was here. So we did the survey of all this part of the lake, and we got more than 600 meters of water depth, more than 600 meters water depth, very close to the glacier front. But now the glacier is about a couple of kilometers far away. So we need to go back and do the survey of all this part of the tongue that is gone in only the last 7 years. We hope to do it this very soon. And this is a sketch, a profile of another glacier in Patagonia that is also having this calving effect very, very clearly, affecting the stability of the lower tongue. This is Glacier O'Higgins in the southern Patagonian icefield. So we're talking about the profile of about 45 kilometers from the Little Ice Age maximum here up to the present, well, 2019. And you can see the surface topographies here, the available surface topography, but the glacier was reaching up to this point at the end of the 19th century. And most of the retreat, especially in when the highest rates took place, was here where the lake is having the maximum water depth of 833 meters, which is one of the deepest lakes in Patagonia. So what is going on up to the future if the glacier is still retreating? We don't know, because the subglacial topography is not very well known. There's several papers, Stakarvik, Milan, that just published a paper about ice thicknesses in everywhere in the world, including Patagonia. But hopefully there is not inverse subglacial topography, so it's probably rising. I mean, the bottom of the ice, so it's hopefully getting more stable if the recession continues into the future. Some consequences, well, disaster like this one in Villa Santa Lucia, geomorphological changes like this in Lago Higgins, that a new lake was born, changes in glacier flow, like Piramia was flowing down to this lake in 45, and now is pushing toward the north to Lago Higgins, and and several other things that we can summarize as the effects on the ecosystemic services that these glaciers are providing. And it's a wide range of services, but the most important, I think, in our country is the provision of water and the risks that are increasing in several areas connected to glaciers because the expansion of proglacial lakes, etc. And also the water quality, especially in central Chile, where we are observing this, you know, mud flows, turbidity increase, etc. So these are some of the consequences of the deglaciation that is taking place. So let's go to the legislation. I think we still have time for talking about the legislation. Well, I think very few countries in the world are having a law. Yeah, Argentina is one of them, and I think in Chile we were behind Argentina, and we saw that was a good idea to have a similar law in the country. And this was a good idea, I think, because the glaciers were not included in any legislation in the country up to the beginning of this process of the preparation of the law. The bad thing is that we copy, in a way, the Argentinian law, and maybe all these elements of the Argentinian law are not necessarily applicable to the Chilean case. But anyway, in our country, in Chile, because the climate change crisis that I was describing and the deglaciation I was describing before, the people was more aware about the glacier changes and the need for protection. And I think one of the most critical years was when in 2004, 2005, when Pascualama, the mining project, began to propose, you know, the removal of glaciers in the higher part of the Andes in northern Chile, and that was you know, an open call for all the society saying, okay, we need mining activities. Copper, gold are quite important for the country, but it is necessary to remove the ice to get the ore that is, or the mineral that is underneath the ice. So that was the beginning of a big discussion. And especially because the word glacier was not included in any law. Well, up to the point, because if you talk to a lawyer, if you put two lawyers together, both will have a totally different opinion. Yeah? One of them, regarding this issue, one of them says glaciers are not in any law of the country, so we need to prepare a new law for glaciers. And the other lawyer I saw, he says, no, glaciers are included because glaciers are water, and water in a solid state. And waters are included in the water code, so it's included in the legislation. Anyway, we are not lawyers, so we don't need to have these contrasting opinions. But in fact, the word glacier is not in any, was not in any law of the country almost up to now. The environmental framework law that was published in the 90s, the 19300, this is the number of the law, it has a detailed procedure for any project that was invested in the country. And at the beginning, glaciers were not explicitly included, but then was a modification in 2013 and glaciers were included. But, and thanks to that, any economic activity operating nearby glaciers needs to present an environmental impact assessment. And that, I mean, these environmental impact assessments were compulsory from a long time. I mean, since the publication of the environmental law 20 years ago. But glaciers were not clearly included in those environmental impact assessments. But with Pascualama, when they submitted and they proposed the removal of the ice, the agency in charge of this environmental impact assessment took care of that and says, you cannot remove the ice. You are not allowed to have a direct effect on the glaciers, and you need to demonstrate that you are not having an indirect effect on the glaciers. And that was a big change, and that began to be applicable to any project related to glaciers, especially in the high Andes, where mining activities are so important. So what kind of elements or variables need to be included in any environmental impact assessment related to glaciers? Well, here, location, area, thickness, surface topography, all these aspects here are mandatory, and any project at the moment needs to include these elements for the environmental impact assessment. And at the moment, and in the last at least 10 years since the beginning of Pascualama, no project are allowed to interfere directly with glaciers. This is forbidden, and this is a good advance. And because in the 80s, during the dictatorship, for example, in 1983, 82, 83, a mining company was removing the ice for exploding copper. and that was publicized as a big advance of the Chilean engineers. And now, obviously, this is, you know, unbelievable. But well, we are living in a different time. So this is the history of the law. The Pascualama began. Well, I mean, it's a long story about Pascualama, but the project related to glaciers began in 2001, and they submitted the environmental, the first environmental impact assessment in 2006, and then in 2008 they received the answer saying you are not allowed to remove the ice, and you need to do a monitoring process, avoiding any kind of indirect impact. In this context was the first glacier law project that was submitted in 2006. And was a good idea, but obviously was very, you know, general in a way, and with a very strong environmental point of view. So that was the beginning of this project. Another very important point in this timeline was in 2008 when a glacier unit was formed in DGA, this water cadastre organism at the Public Works Ministry. In 2009 was published the national policy about glaciers, and I used to have the opportunity to prepare the glacier national strategy in 2009. So many changes, but the law was in there, was under discussion, but not big changes, not approval, didn't go further in Parliament because there was not consensus. I mean, there are different views, and some of the elements of the law were too tight, for example, or too restrictive for activities nearby glaciers, and then, you know, at the end, nothing happened with the law after almost 10 years, until a new proposal was submitted in 2014. Yeah, and other laws were submitted also by ONGs in 2014-15, but at the end, you know, the beginning of the proper discussion took place in 2015, when the president again interfered, he submitted a substitutive indication for this law that was not exactly the same of the 2005. Was a different law with more support of scientific community and trying to get some consensus for the different political parties in the country. The parliamentary discussion began in 2015 and took place for several years until in 2018 was withdrawn. And was withdrawn because the president, I mean, Piñera in that time, saw that was not a good one, and he submitted a new proposal in 2019. So up to now, you know, there are several projects that were under discussions in different levels of discussions. But at the end, the new proposal, the 2019 new proposal, is the one that is now under discussion, and after all these years, moved from different commissions within the parliament, and at the moment, we have a text that was approved by the Environmental Commission of the Senate, the Parliament, the Senate House, and is now going to the Finance Commission because there are money involved in the law, because there's investments that need to be done. So when money is involved, need to go to the Finance Commission. But at the moment, let's say that after almost 15 years, we have a final draft of a draw that is having the consensus of most of the political parties. Obviously, some of the articles were not approved unanimously. In some cases, it was just a majority. But at the end, we have a text that is available, and I think will be approved in the coming months. Some of the basics of the new law is having 10 articles. 8 articles are permanent and 2 are provisionals. And here you can see the first one is about aims, definitions. These are the articles of the law, the proposed law. And one of the problems, I mean, in the aims of the law, that is, in my point of view, this is always my point of view of this problem, is that the law is not only about glaciers. Yeah, it's about glaciers, permafrost, and what is called the surrounding areas. I was trying to find the best translation of entorno. This is the word that is used in this proposed law, entorno. Originally they were using the word periglacial, but was not the academic definition. So at the end was dismissed the use of periglacial. So we were using the word entorno in Spanish, the entorno glacial, or glacial surroundings, or glacial environment. I think surrounding is the best translation. But the problem is the definition of this surrounding area is not totally clear. There is no distances, not area. So the proposed law said, well, in the surrounding area, anybody investing or doing any activities need to submit environmental impact assessments. So this is a problem because, I mean, how far away from a glacier is a surrounding area? Well, the law says the surrounding area is within a distance that is possibly affecting the glacier. This is a matter of discussion, of course. Then the definitions, well, glaciers are defined in not necessarily as we can define scientifically, but it's a more operational definition. It's not including dynamics, it's including any kind of glacier, rock glacier, debris-covered glacier, bare ice, etc. It's defined the surrounding glacier basins and permafrost. In Chile, there are very little studies about permafrost, or we don't know too much about this, and it's included in the law. And this is one of the problems that were strongly opposed by many people, because there are several mining activities on high altitude mountains where permafrost could exist, but we don't know, there are not specific studies. So this is one of the big issues. The law is also declaring that the glaciers are national public assets that are not subject or private property or concession agreements. This is I mean, so you cannot sell or buy an ice or nearby the ice. The glacier law also is including the need for a new inventory with methods, etc., that will need to be detailed, and is describing what kind of activities are forbidden on glaciers, and basically all activities are forbidden, but science. At the beginning, even science was forbidden in a way that we needed to, even if you were going to put stakes and so on, you need to, in the first proposed law, you need to declare and submit an environmental impact assessment. So it was quite complicated. But now science is considered an activity that could be done on glaciers, as well as sustainable tourism and sport, and also if there is any risk prevention activity that need to be done. But, and then is stating that any activity that is taking place in the surroundings of the glaciers need to submit environmental impact assessment with the participation of the communities and the local population, if any. And is defining what kind of protection system is necessary for the surroundings and the permafrost. And again, there is a problem with this because we will need to model. There is no map of permafrost in Chile. We have a glacier inventory, as I told you before. So we know if you have a project, you know there is a glacier or not, but we don't know where is the permafrost. So if I have a project at high altitude, well, now I will need to study the permafrost and say, no, there is no permafrost. Oh yes, it's a continuous permafrost, discontinuous, but any kind of permafrost at the moment is included in this law. And there's some provisional articles regarding the projects that already have permissions. They will need to adapt to this new legislation. As I told you, some problems is that the law is not only about glaciers, it's also about the surrounding areas of the permafrost. Glaciers are defined water in solid state, and that need to persist at least for 5 years. This is another problem because maybe even in 5 years you can see snow patches without ice, but will be included in the inventory and also in the law. This is another problem, is the minimum size. The minimum size used to be 1 hectare up to now. The glacier inventory of the country is 1 hectare, the minimum area. But now is proposed to 1/10 of an hectare, 1.0.1 hectare as a minimum for the fragments of a glacier that is before declaring that the ice disappeared. So the glacier inventory, as far as I understand, will include any surface up to down to 1 hectare, but if a former glacier is fragmented in several pieces of ice, these pieces will need to be mapped until 1/10 of an hectare. And this is quite complicated, you know, it's quite difficult to be done. So this is another big issue. Then another problem is that was defined a buffer of 300 meters underneath the ice as a protected area for protecting the water and the subglacial topography, etc. This number, 300 meters, was a consensus. I mean, somebody was proposing a minimum of 200, and I was saying, well, we need to be much more, 500. And at the end, okay, well, what we can do, 200 is too low, 3,000 meters too much, okay, 300 meters. And that was an agreement. Anyway, the surrounding is not very well defined, and there is a retroactive application. This is another problem because there are projects at the moment, mining projects and other people that is operated nearby glaciers, and they have permits, but now they will need to submit environmental impact assessment if glaciers are possibly indirectly affected. As I told you, no direct effects are already taking place in the country because they are forbidden. Good things, well, there is a political agreement. Hopefully this will protect the glaciers. In my point of view, the glaciers were already protected, but the law will improve that. And I think it's a need for the country. Nobody at the moment can say, no, forget about the law. Because I mean, the society need the law at the moment. Even if in practice, the glaciers are protected, without a law will be a big fail for our society after almost 20 years of discussion. So I think it's good to have this discussion. Hopefully this will be approved. If approved with the writing as we have at the moment, will enhance our research because many projects will need to include monitoring, glacier monitoring programs. We will need to have technicians, PhD, etc. So will be a good boost to our activities in the country. So in conclusion, well, you know, many things are going on in the country. We have a new government that is proposing new changes. Hopefully, these changes will have the consensus for, you know, improving our political discussion and trying to reduce the pressure, the stress that we are living because all these issues, the pandemic, the climate change, water scarcity, etc. So hopefully this law will help along this way and will be a good thing for the scientific, the glaciologists and the scientific community. Well, that's it. Hopefully you enjoyed the talk. I think I took much more time than I was expected, but I'm sorry that it was, I think, interesting for you to see what's going on in the country. And Tavi also told me to show you the next seminar that will take next week. So it's about the movie, the good, the bad, and the ugly. So I hope you can join this seminar next week. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Andreas. So as usual, if people have questions, if they want to put them into the chat, I guess it's fantastic to see this kind of law happening. I think it's really critical. And I'll let Paco have the first question, but I also want to ask a question in a little while. Paco, would you like to go ahead? You get the first one.
Okay. Well, thanks, Andres, for this interesting talk. It is always nice to learn about the climate, the glacier conditions, and also the legislation of the various regions or countries. My particular question is whether this observed mega drought that you have mentioned was predicted with some accuracy by any climate model. So in particular, I'm curious about knowing whether the models are good. How good are the models at predicting the anthropogenic and the natural variability part that you mentioned?
Yeah, well, you know, I'm not a climatologist, but as far as I know, after talking and reading the papers by René Garreau and his group at the University of Chile that are proper climatologists, very well-known people, I think the models were not good enough for predicting the mega drought. This is the first thing. And at the beginning of the mega drought, we didn't know that it's going to take place for 13 years now. So I think this is the first point. I mean, the models were not enough. This is at least as far as I know. And now, because this poor correlation between ENSO phenomenon and the low precipitation taking place in central Chile, I think is getting complicated to forecast into the future. But in agreement with the paper by René and his group, I think they have analyzed the percentage that could be, you know, could be related to anthropogenic factors. But I suggest to talk to René if you want to go into more details about this.
Okay, thanks. But a second question, just quickly. You mentioned in your 2 slides ago that every people or every glaciologist studying glaciers is like somehow forced to do monitoring activities. So if you want to do some modeling or you want to take an ice core, do you mean that they will be forced somehow to do also monitoring?
No. I'm sorry if you didn't understand or I didn't explain very well. In the first proposed law that was submitted in 2006, and in the next years, there are other proposed laws submitted by politicians and other people. In some of them, the scientific activity was very restricted. And they say, if you want to go to the glacier and do whatever, you know, scientifically, you need to submit an environmental impact assessment or declaration if it's something, you know, very simple. But if you want to go with the snow ski-doos or you want to drill with a driller for stakes or an ice core, you need to do an environmental impact assessment. But that was the first proposed law. In the last one that is already under discussion, scientific activities are allowed, but obviously depending on the level of intervention that you want to propose on a glacier, I presume you will need to do some kind of assessment in terms of environmental impact. But in the law, scientific activity are not restricted at all.
Okay, thank you.
Is there I'll let other people put questions onto the chat, but I was going to ask a little bit about the law. Is my understanding right that the glacier itself is essentially owned by the state or cooperatively for all the people, whereas the land underneath it is that can be owned by a private individual? Is that the way it works, that the water is then protected but the land underneath can be owned by someone?
I mean, yeah, I was asking a lawyer about how to translate the legal status of a glacier into English, because in Spanish it says bien nacional de uso público. Yeah, so that means national or public assets for public use. So that means that it's in a way is owned by the state, or nobody owns the glacier, but the state. And the land, generally speaking in Chile, above certain altitude, the land is also bien nacional de uso público, so public assets. But there could be a conflict between the mining law and the future glacier law, because, as you say, you can have some property, land property, underneath the ice even, and there are some projects having operations nearby glaciers underneath the ice, and they are allowed to do that, but now they will be restricted if they are less than 300 meters away from a glacier. So yes, the ice is not appropriable, it's not concessionable, and it's owned by the state, but the land will be private owned. But in general, at high altitude is also a public land in general.
Thank you. It gets very complicated always, doesn't it, when you start talking about the details. I was also quite encouraged to see the idea that even science will need an environmental impact assessment. I know that this will be about as popular with colleagues as an idea that as, or it won't be popular with colleagues, but I actually feel like that is coming to all of us in all countries pretty soon, that we'll have to do a proper environmental impact assessment, including greenhouse gas emissions for future projects, and justify the science against the full environmental and climate impact of the project. I seriously think this is coming to us all, and it would be good, and it will be good when it comes. But
yeah, well, most of the glaciers in our country are located within national parks, and in those cases, you need to submit an environmental impact declaration before having the permission to operate within the park. And they can say, no, I mean, this is too much, you need to do an environmental impact assessment, for example. So, so if you go to a national park, you need to, forget the permission, for having the permission, the permit, you need to declare that you are not affecting, the environment. And if you are going to do it in any way, for example, drilling an ice core using fuel or gasoline, they will not allow you to do, and you will need to do an environmental impact assessment. The problem is that not all the glaciers are in national parks. So this is something new that probably will need to be regulated. And DGA, this water cluster office, will probably need to take care about this.
Thank you. Are there any other questions from anyone on this talk? Roger, go ahead.
Oh, yeah, thanks very much. Andres, that was fantastic. That was a really tremendous volume of work. It's obviously aligned at preventing the damage to glaciers that's going on at the moment. I wonder how you think your central government is responding to this. They obviously must be on board if you're going to get a national law like this approved, which is wonderful. But do you think they still have the momentum to push for global climate change mitigation? And I've mentioned things like, moving to electric vehicles in cities, solar PV everywhere, and so on and so forth, to help the bigger picture.
Yeah, certainly. I think there is a big change. A couple of weeks ago, a new government, a left-wing government, that won the election, took the power, and they are in the program of this new government. They are pushing for an environmental agenda. They declare a feminist government, environmentalist government, and they are planning to do several reforms. So I presume They will push for this legislation to be approved, and other legislations about climate change that was already approved. And it's interesting because one of the leaders in climatology in the country, Maisa Rojas, yeah, who is a very well-known scientist that was in the IPCC, one of the leaders of the IPCC. Now she is a minister in the government, the environmental ministry, I think is the name. And she was designated by the new government in this role. So I think, yes, I mean, I hope that they can have the power to push for this and the consensus. The problem is that in Parliament, things are quite in equilibrium between right and left. So if they want to push for this reforming agenda, they will need to have some agreements with the right-wing coalitions. And this will be more complicated. Not because they don't want to protect the environment or confront climate change, but they have a different point of view for many things. So we need to have a consensus, and this is getting complicated, I think.
Yeah, complicated indeed, but thank you very much. That was absolutely tremendous. Thank you, Andres.
You're welcome.
I think Hester has had to leave, but she's put a comment on the chat that there is a mention of glaciers within Russian federal law. But she has also put a question onto the chat. She says, some laws are so precise, glacier size, depth underneath a glacier, that the actual measurements, glacier thickness, are sometimes missing to match the precision in the law. The ultimate question is whether we should have broad laws or precise laws. And I think, unfortunately, she's gone. So if that isn't fully understandable, we're not going to be able to ask for.
Yeah, very quickly. Yeah, I was mentioning the 300 meters because it looks like arbitrary. I mean, why 300 and not 250? And the problem is that we have very few ice thickness measurements in the country, and the uncertainties of the models are quite high. We have ice thicknesses for the whole glaciers of the country, because thanks to Milan and other people that publish recent databases, but uncertainties are quite high. So now we are talking about 300 meters below the bottom of the ice. And what is the bottom of the ice? Well, we need to do radar, and there is no radar. We need to do gravimetry, yeah, but there are uncertainties, etc., etc. So it will be complicated because there are no data for many glaciers. So this needs to be done. So it's good news for glaciologists. We will have a lot of work.
Fantastic. I think we've run out of questions, but if anyone does have a last question, feel free to unmute yourself. But otherwise, I think it calls upon me to say thank you very much for an absolutely fascinating talk, Andreas. That was absolutely amazing. Just lots and lots and lots of data, but also a really exciting new development, I think, in how we deal with the natural world. So thank you very much indeed. That was a great seminar. Thank you.
Well, thanks to you, and thank you to all the attendees and all the people that was asking and was interested about what's going on in the country. Thank you very much.
Well, thank you very much indeed, and lovely to see everyone as always. The recording will be up on YouTube in a couple of days, and hope to see you at next week's seminar by Andy Ashwanden. So see you all next week.
Bye.
All right, thank you.
Yes, Andres.